The diner was almost empty that night, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it should. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixed with a faint aroma of pancakes that had been flipped not long ago. It was close to midnight, and most people in the city were asleep. Only a few regulars sat scattered across the booths, sipping coffee, lost in their thoughts. At the counter stood Emma, a young waitress in her late 20s. She had been working long hours for weeks, saving every dollar she could. Life hadn't been kind to her. Her mother's medical bills piled up each month, and the old car she drove often broke down without warning. Yet, no matter how heavy her burdens were, Emma carried herself with quiet strength. She smiled at every customer, made small talk, and never let her struggles show. That night, though, something unexpected happened. As she refilled a man's coffee, the bell above the door jingled. A tall figure stepped in, face hidden under a hood, hands buried in his pockets. He didn't order. He didn't sit. Instead, he pulled something out of his coat. A gun. The room froze. A few customers gasped, one woman screamed, and a man dropped his fork onto the plate with a clatter. "Everyone stay quiet," the robber barked, waving the gun toward the cash register. His voice was shaky, but the weapon in his hand made everyone's blood run cold. People ducked under the tables, trembling, whispering prayers. But Emma, she didn't flinch. She stood steady behind the counter, her heart racing but her face calm. She looked the man straight in the eye, her voice steady, almost gentle. "Sir," she said, "you don't need to do this." The robber blinked, startled. He expected screams, panic, maybe even someone trying to run. But this waitress, this ordinary young woman, was calm, almost unnervingly calm. Her composure shifted the entire room's energy. And in the corner booth, quietly watching the scene unfold, sat a man no one had paid much attention to. A man dressed in a tailored suit, sipping his coffee in silence. A billionaire who had come in for a late-night meal, searching for anonymity in a small-town diner. His name was Jonathan Reed. What he witnessed in that moment would change everything. The diner felt like it had been pulled into another world, one where time slowed and every breath was measured. The robber's hands trembled as he pointed the gun toward the register, his knuckles white. The customers hid in fear, whispering prayers under the tables. But Emma stayed rooted, her posture steady as if she had faced storms far worse than this. Jonathan Reed, the billionaire in the corner booth, leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes fixed on her. He had seen people break under pressure. Executives in high-stakes meetings, business partners facing financial ruin. But never had he seen someone so calm while staring down a gun. "Empty the register," the robber shouted again, his voice cracking. Emma took a slow breath, nodding gently. "I will," she said softly, "but I need you to take a breath first. Please, look at your hands, they're shaking. I know you don't want to do this." The man froze. Her words cut through the tension like a blade, not with sharpness but with unexpected warmth. His grip on the gun loosened just slightly, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. Emma didn't rush. She opened the register drawer with deliberate calm, not making any sudden moves. She placed a few bills on the counter. "Here, take it if you need it. But I promise you this isn't the way." Something in her voice, gentle, steady, almost motherly, made the robber hesitate. He blinked rapidly as though fighting tears. Nobody dared to move. Nobody dared to breathe. Jonathan's heart pounded as he watched. This waitress wasn't just brave. She had something most people lacked, a rare ability to remain composed when everyone else crumbled. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was just human. And yet, in that humanity, she was stronger than anyone in the room. The robber's chest rose and fell rapidly. He grabbed the bills from the counter, but didn't take more. He backed toward the door, muttering, I'm sorry. Then, in a blink, he was gone, vanishing into the night. Silence filled the diner. Customers peeked from under the tables, trembling but unharmed. Slowly, relief washed over them. A woman whispered, "She saved us." Emma exhaled deeply, finally allowing her hands to shake once the danger had passed. But she didn't cry, didn't collapse. She simply straightened up, as though telling herself she had to stay strong. For everyone, Jonathan Reed remained seated, his eyes never leaving her. In that instant, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. The police arrived minutes later, lights flashing outside the diner. Officers rushed in, questioning witnesses, writing notes, and checking the register. Customers were still shaken, voices trembling as they retold what had happened. But the one person who seemed the most composed was Emma. She calmly explained the incident to the officers, her voice steady even as others stumbled over their words. Jonathan Reed stayed quiet in his booth, observing. He was a man used to commanding boardrooms, to being the most powerful voice in the room. But here, it wasn't his wealth or influence that mattered. It was the quiet strength of a waitress who had just faced down danger without flinching. When the police finally left and the diner returned to a strange stillness, Jonathan rose from his seat. He approached the counter, where Emma was pouring herself a glass of water, her hands still slightly trembling. "You kept everyone calm," Jonathan said, his voice low but full of admiration. Emma looked up, surprised. She hadn't even noticed him in the corner booth. To her, he was just another late-night customer. "I just did what I had to do," she replied, brushing off the praise. People were scared. Someone had to keep things steady. Jonathan studied her. Most people would have been proud, even shaken to the point of tears. But Emma carried herself as though this was simply another test life had thrown her way. "That wasn't ordinary," he said. "What you did, most people couldn't." She gave a faint smile, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe, but I've learned panicking doesn't fix anything. I grew up watching my mom handle tough times. She taught me to breathe first, act second. Guess it stuck." Jonathan felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, respect mixed with curiosity. For so long, he had been surrounded by people chasing his wealth, his power. Yet here was a woman earning tips by the hour, showing more strength than the CEOs he dealt with daily. Emma glanced at the clock. "Your coffee's cold. Wanted to get you a fresh cup." Jonathan chuckled softly. Even after everything, she was back to her job, serving with the same care as before. It humbled him. As he sat back down, he thought to himself, this woman doesn't even know how extraordinary she is. And that thought sparked something in him, an idea that would soon shock not only Emma, but the entire world. The diner returned to its late-night rhythm, but the air still carried the weight of what had just happened. Customers slowly left, each one thanking Emma in hushed voices, as though she had performed some impossible act. She responded with a nod or a small smile, never seeking attention, only wanting everyone to feel safe again. Jonathan stayed behind. Something inside him told him this was not the kind of night he could just walk away from. As Emma wiped down the counter, he finally broke the silence. "You know," he said carefully, "I've spent years building companies, leading people, making decisions that affect thousands of lives. But I've never seen leadership like I saw tonight." Emma laughed softly, shaking her head. "Leadership? I'm just a waitress, sir. I keep coffee cups full and make sure people leave with a smile. That's all." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "No, that's not all. You led a room full of terrified people. You made choices under pressure that saved lives. You were calm when everyone else was falling apart. That's leadership in its purest form." She paused, meeting his eyes. There was sincerity in his words, but also something deeper, like he was speaking from experience. "Maybe," she admitted quietly, "but I didn't do it for recognition. I just didn't want anyone hurt." Jonathan nodded slowly. He admired that about her, the selflessness that came so naturally. It reminded him of values he had almost forgotten in his pursuit of wealth and success. Before he could say more, Emma's manager walked over. "Emma, you've done enough for tonight. Go home, get some rest. We'll handle the cleanup." She hesitated, glancing around at the mess of half-finished meals and overturned chairs. But finally, she untied her apron and grabbed her old coat. Jonathan stood as well. "Let me walk you out," he offered. She looked at him, slightly wary. To her, he was still just a stranger in an expensive suit. But something about his tone felt genuine, so she nodded. The night air outside was cool, the streets quiet except for the faint echo of sirens in the distance. Emma pulled her coat tighter, while Jonathan walked beside her, hands in his pockets. "You said you're just a waitress," Jonathan said softly. "But I don't believe that. People like you, they're rare. And when the world sees what I saw tonight, it won't forget." Emma frowned, unsure what he meant. She had no idea that this conversation would become the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. Emma walked toward the bus stop, her shoes tapping softly against the pavement. Jonathan kept pace with her, his polished shoes far quieter, but his presence impossible to ignore. For a while, neither spoke. The night felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Jonathan broke the silence. "Emma, do you mind if I ask you something personal?" She glanced at him, a bit guarded. "Depends what it is." "Why were you so calm in there?" Most people would have been frozen in fear. Emma sighed, looking down at the cracked sidewalk. "Because fear doesn't help. My mom used to tell me. The storm is loudest right before it passes. If you panic, you'll miss your chance to get through it. Life's been one storm after another for me, and I guess I just learned to keep my balance." Jonathan studied her, his admiration growing. Here was a woman with no wealth, no power, yet she had a kind of strength that couldn't be bought. He realized it wasn't just her calmness that struck him, it was her resilience. At the bus stop, Emma sat on the bench, pulling her coat tighter. Jonathan remained standing. "Do you have a ride?" he asked. "I take the bus. My car broke down a month ago, and fixing it cost more than I make in 2 weeks." She smiled faintly, as if brushing it off. "It's fine. I've gotten used to it." Jonathan's chest tightened. To him, a broken car was a minor inconvenience. To her, it was a mountain she had to climb daily. "And yet," she didn't complain. The bus pulled up, headlights bright against the dark street. Emma stood. "Thank you for walking me. And for the kind words." Jonathan hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed her his business card. "If you ever need anything at all, call me." She looked at the card, eyebrows raised. "Jonathan Reed?" She blinked in recognition. "You're that Jonathan Reed? The billionaire?" He smiled lightly. "Just a man who saw something tonight he'll never forget." Emma shook her head with disbelief, tucking the card into her bag. She didn't fully understand why a billionaire would care about a small-town waitress. But something in his voice made her believe his words weren't empty. As the bus doors opened, Jonathan said quietly, "Emma, people will know your name one day. You won't be just a waitress." She gave him a soft smile before stepping inside. "Maybe, but even if I am, that's enough for me." The bus pulled away, leaving Jonathan standing alone under the streetlight, more certain than ever that he had just witnessed greatness disguised in the simplest of for Jonathan didn't sleep that night. Back in his penthouse, with the city skyline glittering outside his windows, he kept replaying the scene in the diner. He had built empires, signed billion-dollar deals, and been named one of the most powerful men in the country. Yet nothing he had witnessed in the boardroom compared to the courage of a woman earning tips behind a counter. The next morning, his assistant found him unusually restless. "Sir, you have meetings all day. Tokyo, London, New York," she reminded him. Jonathan shook his head. "Cancel them. All of them." The assistant blinked in shock. "All of them?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I need to work on something else." That something else was Emma. He couldn't shake the thought that her strength deserved a platform, a chance to inspire others. Too many times he had seen people in power collapse under stress, while this woman, who had every reason to feel defeated by life, had stood tall in the face of danger. He felt the world needed to know her story. Later that week, Jonathan showed up at the diner again. Emma was surprised to see him, but greeted him with the same warm professionalism as any other customer. "You're back," she said, pouring him coffee. "I told you I wouldn't forget what I saw," Jonathan replied. "I wasn't exaggerating." She chuckled softly. "You're making too much of it. I just did what anyone would do." Jonathan leaned forward. "No, most people would have panicked. You didn't, and I want people to hear about that. Not just in this town, but everywhere." Emma frowned. "Everywhere? What do you mean?" "I want to share your story," Jonathan said. "I have connections, media, charities, organizations. If you allow me, I want to create something around what you represent. Courage, grace under pressure, resilience. Emma blinked, caught off guard. Me? I'm not special. I'm just a waitress trying to pay bills. Jonathan smiled gently. That's exactly why it's powerful. Because you're ordinary, and you did something extraordinary. She was quiet for a moment, staring at the coffee pot in her hand. The idea of her life being seen by millions felt unreal, almost frightening. But she could see Jonathan's sincerity, and deep down, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her story really could help someone else's mess. For days, Emma wrestled with Jonathan's offer. She didn't see herself as someone remarkable. She was just working shifts, paying bills, and trying to hold life together. But late at night, she thought about the frightened faces in the diner, how people had looked at her after the robbery, with gratitude, almost with awe. Maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe her story wasn't just hers anymore. Finally, she agreed to meet him. They sat in a quiet cafe, not far from the diner. Jonathan came without the entourage he usually carried, just him and his notebook. If you're ready, he said, I want to help you tell your story in a way that inspires the world. Emma sipped her tea nervously. But what if people think I don't deserve it? What if they say I'm nobody? Jonathan smiled. That's exactly the point. The world doesn't need another billionaire giving speeches about success. It needs real people, people like you, showing what true courage looks like. So it began. Within weeks, Jonathan arranged for Emma's story to be featured in local newspapers. Then national outlets picked it up. Headlines read, Waitress stays calm in armed robbery, saves customers' lives. The footage in the diner's security camera showed her steady posture and calm voice, and soon millions were sharing the video online. Emma became a quiet symbol of resilience. Reporters wanted interviews, organizations invited her to speak, and schools asked her to talk to students about staying strong under pressure. At first, Emma felt overwhelmed. She had never been in front of cameras before. But each time she spoke, she remembered the fear in that diner and how calmness had given people hope. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. You don't have to be rich or powerful to make a difference. You just have to choose courage over fear. Jonathan watched from the sidelines, proud. He had backed countless ventures, but this was different. This wasn't about profits or headlines. This was about showing the world the extraordinary strength hidden in ordinary people. And as Emma's story spread, it started doing exactly what he had hoped. It gave others permission to believe they too could stand strong in their darkest moments. Months passed, and Emma's life changed in ways she never could have imagined. She was still the same person, still helping her mom with medical bills, still greeting neighbors with a smile, but now people recognized her on the street. They would stop her just to say, Thank you for reminding us what bravery looks like. One evening, she was invited to speak at a university auditorium. Thousands filled the seats, students and teachers alike. Emma stood at the podium, nervous at first, then steadying herself as she looked at the crowd. I'm not a hero, she began, her voice clear. I'm just someone who learned that fear doesn't solve anything. That night in the diner, I was scared too, but I realized if I panicked, others would panic. So I chose calm, and that choice made all the difference. The audience hung on every word. Some had tears in their eyes. Others nodded, as if her words gave them strength they had been missing. Emma ended with a line that echoed across the hall. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you face fear with steady hands. The applause was thunderous. Jonathan, sitting quietly in the back row, felt his chest tighten with pride. He had invested in companies that changed technology, but helping Emma share her message, this felt like his greatest investment yet. As Emma left the stage, reporters rushed forward. One asked, Emma, what do you hope people take away from your story? She smiled, her eyes shining. That ordinary people can do extraordinary things. You don't need millions in the bank to change the world. Sometimes you just need one moment of calm. Her words spread across news outlets, social media, and talk shows. Worldwide, people began sharing their own stories of staying calm under pressure. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, even students. Emma's moment in a small-town diner had become a global movement of courage. That night, Jonathan approached her backstage. "I told you people would know your name," he said warmly. Emma laughed softly. "I never wanted fame. But if my story gives someone strength, then it was worth it." Jonathan extended his hand, not as a billionaire, but as a friend. "Emma, you reminded the world that true power isn't in money or status. It's in character, and in that moment." Emma realized her calmness that night had done more than stop a robbery. It had inspired millions to believe they, too, could stand strong in the face of fear.